1:09 p.m. The slap echoed across 135th Street like a gunshot. Mayme Johnson's head snapped to the side, her body collapsing against the brick wall of Miller's grocery. The paper bag exploded, apples rolling into the gutter, eggs cracking yellow against the pavement, bread tumbling into a puddle that hadn't dried from yesterday's rain. The white cop standing over her shook out his hand and smiled. "You don't walk away when I'm talking to you." Racial slur. It was 6:37 in the evening on Friday, October 7th, 1938. In the heart of Harlem, the autumn sun dipped below the tenement buildings, casting long shadows across the sidewalk where Mayme Johnson, all 5 feet 3 inches of her, pressed one hand against her cheek and tasted blood in her mouth. Officer Patrick Donovan adjusted his belt and looked around at the frozen crowd. Mothers pulled their children closer. Old men playing checkers on the corner suddenly found the pavement fascinating. Everyone knew what happened to people who witnessed things in Harlem, especially when a cop was involved. "You got something to say now?" Donovan leaned down, his face inches from Mayme's. "Or are you going to keep acting like you're too good to answer a simple question?" Mayme's hands trembled as she pushed herself up to sitting. The left side of her face was already swelling, a red handprint blooming across her dark skin like a brand. She was 32 years old, a church-going woman who taught piano lessons to the neighborhood children on Sunday afternoons. She wore a blue dress she'd ironed that morning, now torn at the shoulder. She looked up at Donovan and said nothing that made him angrier. "I asked you a question, girl." He grabbed her arm and hauled her to her feet, slamming her back against the wall hard enough that her head bounced off the brick. "Where's your husband? Where's Bumpy?" 3 blocks away, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson was sitting in the back room of the Rhythm Club, settling a dispute between 2 numbers runners. He was a tall man, lean and precise in his movements, wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than most Harlem families made in a month. At 41 years old, he'd earned a reputation as a man who kept order in the neighborhood, not through chaos, but through calculated consequences. People came to Bumpy when they had problems the police wouldn't solve, or when the police were the problem. He had no idea that in 3 minutes, a 10-year-old boy named Marcus would burst through the door with news that would set Harlem on fire. Back on 135th Street, Donovan's partner, a younger cop named Sullivan with a fresh face and dead eyes, finally spoke up. "Pat, come on. We got what we came for." Donovan ignored him. He was holding Mayme's arm so tight his knuckles had gone white, his face so close she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "Your boy thinks he runs this neighborhood," Donovan hissed. "Thinks because he's got money and a fancy suit, he's untouchable. But you know what you are? You know what all of you are? You're animals. And I'm the one who keeps you in line." Mayme's jaw tightened. She'd been raised by a grandmother who survived slavery, who taught her that dignity wasn't something anyone could take away unless you gave it to them. But there was something in Donovan's eyes, a hunger, a cruelty that went beyond simple racism, that told her this wasn't about money or territory or even power. This was about breaking her. "My husband," she started. "Your husband is a criminal." Donovan cut her off. "A numbers runner and a thug who should have been in prison 10 years ago. And you're his whore." The word hung in the air. Across the street, old Mrs. Patterson dropped the handkerchief she'd been pretending to fuss with. 2 doors down, James Miller stood in the doorway of his grocery store, watching with his fists clenched at his sides. Everyone was watching. No one moved, because this was Harlem in 1938, and a black man who interfered with a white cop's business didn't make it home to his family. Mayme closed her eyes. "That's what I thought." Donovan released her arm with a shove. "You tell Bumpy that I came by. Tell him he owes me for last month. And the price just went up. Tell him I want $200 by Sunday, or next time I won't be so gentle with his pretty little wife." He laughed and turned to walk away. That's when Mayme spoke. My name is Mayme Johnson. The words came out quiet but clear. Donovan stopped walking. My name, she repeated, louder now, is Mayme Johnson. Not girl, not racial slur, not whore. She straightened her dress with shaking hands. And you will remember it. For a moment, nobody breathed. Donovan turned around slowly, and the expression on his face made Mrs. Patterson grab her granddaughter's hand and pull her inside. What did you say to me? Mamie met his eyes, and in that moment, she knew she'd made a choice that couldn't be unmade. That dignity had a price, and she was about to pay it. I said, Donovan's fist caught her in the stomach. She doubled over, gasping, and he grabbed a handful of her hair, yanking her head back. You want respect? He put his face close to hers. Here's your respect. He spat in her face. Then he shoved her down into the broken eggs and rotting fruit, grinding her cheek into the filth with his boot. Stay down, he said, where you belong. Sullivan shifted uncomfortably. Pat, that's enough. Captain said, keep it clean. Captain ain't here. Donovan stepped back, looking down at Mamie's crumpled form. And this bitch needed to learn. Tell Bumpy. 200 by Sunday. Or I come back for you. They walked away laughing, their footsteps echoing off the buildings until they disappeared. For 5 full seconds, the street remained frozen. Then Mrs. Patterson rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside Mamie. James Miller ran from his store with a wet towel. A woman Mamie had never met helped her sit up, whispering, I'm so sorry, over and over like a prayer. Mamie's face was covered in dirt and egg yolk and her own blood, but her eyes were dry. She wouldn't give Donovan her tears. Someone needs to tell Bumpy, Mrs. Patterson said. No. Mamie's voice was steady despite everything. I'll tell him myself. But it was already too late. Marcus had seen everything from the corner where he'd been selling newspapers. The moment Donovan walked away, Marcus dropped a stack of papers and ran. He ran like the devil himself was chasing him, not stopping until he burst to the back door of the Rhythm Club. Bumpy looked up from the table where he'd just convinced 2 grown men not to kill each other over 6 blocks of territory. Mr. Johnson. Marcus bent over, hands on his knees, trying to catch his breath. Mr. Johnson, it's Miss Mamie. Bumpy was standing before the boy finished a sentence. What happened? A cop, a white cop. Marcus looked up, and there were tears streaming down his face. He hit her, Mr. Johnson. He hit her, and he called her terrible things, and she's hurt, and everyone saw, but nobody helped. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I couldn't. The room went absolutely silent. Everyone who knew Bumpy Johnson understood that they'd just witnessed a line being crossed that could never be uncrossed. Bumpy's face didn't change. He didn't raise his voice. He simply buttoned his jacket with careful, deliberate movements and straightened his tie. Where? He asked quietly. Outside Miller's grocery. Bumpy was already moving toward the door. One of the number's runners, a man named Tommy who'd worked for Bumpy for 6 years, stood up. Bumpy, wait. You can't just move. Tommy moved. Bumpy walked out into the Harlem evening with the steady, purposeful stride of someone who'd already made a decision and was simply waiting for the world to catch up. 3 blocks. That's how far he had to walk to get home. 3 blocks to run through every scenario, every consequence, every choice he could make, and what would cost. 3 blocks to feel the rage building in his chest like a fire that couldn't be put out, only controlled. 3 blocks to realize he'd been lying to himself. The door to their apartment was unlocked. Bumpy pushed it open and stepped inside. The lamps weren't lit. The evening sun coming through the window cast everything in orange and shadow. Then he saw her. She was sitting on the couch in the darkness, still wearing the ruined blue dress. Someone had cleaned the dirt from her face, but the bruise was already forming, purple and angry across her cheekbone. Her hands were folded in her lap, perfectly still, and she was staring at nothing. She didn't look up when he entered. Bumpy closed the door behind him and stood there, taking in the scene. The torn dress, the bruise, the way her shoulders were set, not broken, but holding something back that threatened to shatter her if she let out. He'd killed men for less than this. Who? He asked. His voice came out rough. She finally looked at him, and he saw something in her eyes he'd never seen before. Not fear, not sadness. It was exhaustion. Don't. One word. Bumpy took a step closer. Mayme, don't. She stood up, and her legs shook, but she stayed standing. I know what you're thinking. I know what you want to do. And I'm telling you right now, don't. He put his hands on you. I know what he did. I was there. Then you know I can't let this stand. You can. She walked toward him. You can, because if you do what you're planning, they'll come for you. They'll come for all of us. They'll burn Harlem down just to make a point, and you know it. Bumpy's jaw tightened. So, what do you want to do? Nothing? Let him walk around this neighborhood like he owns it. I want you to be smart. Mayme grabbed his arm. I want you to think. You spent 10 years building something here, keeping the peace, protecting people. Don't throw it away because what? Because some racist cop thinks he can humiliate you in front of the whole damn neighborhood. The words came out harder than he meant them to, and Mayme flinched. Bumpy closed his eyes and took a breath. When he opened them again, his voice was quieter. What's his name? Mayme's grip on his arm tightened. Bumpy. What's his name, Mayme? She looked at him for a long moment, weighing whether telling him would make things better or worse, whether silence was protection or just another form of defeat. Finally, she let go of his arm and sat back down on the couch. Donovan, she whispered. Officer Patrick Donovan. And he said you owe him $200 by Sunday or he's coming back. Bumpy stood perfectly still. $200. He's been running protection on the businesses, taking money, threatening people. Everyone's too scared to say anything because he's got the whole precinct backing him up. And he came to you. He came to me. Mayme's voice was hollow. Said, I was your whore. Said you were an animal who should be in prison. Bumpy walked to the window and looked out at 135th Street. Down below, life was continuing like nothing had happened. Harlem kept moving, but something had shifted. Bumpy had spent his entire adult life building a reputation as the man who solved problems, who kept order, who made sure people could walk these streets without fear. He convinced himself that his power meant something, that respect and money and connections could protect the people he loved. And in one evening, a corrupt cop with a badge and a belly full of whiskey had proven him wrong. Don't. Mayme's voice came from behind him, softer now. Bumpy didn't turn around. Please, she said, whatever you're thinking, don't. Bumpy didn't sleep that night. He sat in the chair by the window, watching the street below as Harlem breathed and moved through the darkness. Mayme had finally fallen asleep around midnight, exhausted from crying she thought he couldn't hear. By the time the sun rose on Saturday morning, he'd made his decision. Then he'd unmade it, then made it again. The problem wasn't killing Donovan. Bumpy had killed men before. He knew how to make a body disappear, knew which cops could be bought, and which judges would look the other way. The problem was what came after. Kill a cop, even a dirty one, and the entire NYPD would descend on Harlem like locusts. They'd raid every speakeasy, shake down every business, arrest anyone who looked at them wrong. They'd turn the neighborhood into a war zone just to prove a point, and innocent people would pay for Bumpy's revenge. People like Mrs. Patterson, who'd helped Mayme off the street, like James Miller, who'd brought a towel. Like the dozens of families who depended on the fragile piece Bumpy had spent years building. But if he did nothing, Mamie stirred on the couch and opened her eyes. "You didn't sleep," she said. It wasn't a question. "No, Bumpy. I'm not going to kill him." The words came out flat, emotionless. Mamie exhaled, relief flooding her face. "Thank God. I was so worried you'd. But I'm not doing nothing either." The relief vanished. Bumpy stood and walked to where she sat, kneeling down so they were eye level. "What he did to you, what he said, I can't let that stand, Mamie. If I do, every small-time thug and crooked cop in this city will think they can come after what's mine, after who I love. And I won't live like that. So, what are you going to do?" "I don't know yet." He touched her face gently, tracing the edge of the bruise with his thumb. "But I'll figure it out. Without starting a war, without starting a war." He kissed her forehead and stood, grabbing his jacket. "Where are you going?" "To listen," he said. "People talk in this neighborhood. Somebody knows something about Donovan that I can use. Somebody always knows something." By 9 in the morning, Bumpy had visited 3 speakeasies, 2 barbershops, and the corner where the numbers runners gathered. By 11, he'd heard the same story 17 different ways. Officer Patrick Donovan was a predator. He'd been working the Harlem beat for 3 years, and in that time he'd built a protection racket that would have impressed some of the mobsters Bumpy knew. Every business on 135th Street paid him. Every shopkeeper handed over cash on the first of the month. And if you didn't pay, "He broke my cousin's arm last month," said a woman named Ruth who ran a salon on Lenox Avenue. Walked right into the shop, said she was behind on her payment, grabbed her arm and twisted until it snapped. She was screaming, and he just smiled. Bumpy's jaw tightened. "She reported?" Ruth laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "Reported to who?" "His captain." "His captain's the one who sent him here in the first place. They got a whole system worked out. Donovan collects, and Captain Morrison takes half. Anybody complains, they end up in the tombs on some made-up charge." "What about the women?" Bumpy asked quietly. Ruth's scissors stopped moving. "What about them?" "I heard Donovan's got a reputation. That my wife wasn't the first woman he put his hands on." The salon went quiet. Ruth set down her scissors and looked at Bumpy. "There's a girl," she said softly. "Lives over on 127th. Name's Alice Cooper. She's 16 years old, and 3 months ago, Donovan—" She trailed off, shaking her head. Her mama tried to report it. Next day, Donovan came back and arrested the girl for solicitation. Said she was a prostitute who'd tried to shake him down. "Where is she now?" "Rikers Island." Ruth picked up her scissors again, but her hands were shaking. "And her mama don't talk about it no more, because Donovan told her if she did, the girl would have an accident in prison." Bumpy felt something cold settle in his stomach. This wasn't just a dirty cop shaking down businesses. This was a monster. "How many others?" he asked. "I don't know," Ruth said. "Nobody talks about it. But if I had to guess, every woman in here has either been touched by Donovan or knows someone who has. We just learned to stay quiet. That's how you survive." Bumpy thanked her and left, stepping out into the October sunshine that suddenly felt too bright for the darkness he'd just learned about. Stay quiet. That's how you survive. The same advice Mamie had given him last night. The same calculation every person in Harlem made every single day. Swallow your pride. Bend your neck. Accept the humiliation because the alternative was worse. He thought about Alice Cooper, 16 years old, rotting in Rikers because she'd been violated and then punished for it. He thought about Ruth and the women in that salon, carrying their fear like a second skin. He thought about Mamie, sitting in their dark apartment, telling him not to make things worse. and he made a new decision. At 2 in the afternoon, Bumpy walked into the Rhythm Club and found Tommy waiting for him. "Word's out," Tommy said. "Donovan heard you were asking about him." "Good." Tommy blinked. "Good?" "Bumpy. The man's looking for an excuse to." "Let him look." Bumpy sat down and gestured for Tommy to join him. "Tell me something. You still in touch with that reporter? The one from the Amsterdam News?" Tommy frowned. "Charlie? Yeah, I see him around." "Why?" "I need you to set up a meeting." "A meeting with a reporter?" Tommy leaned back in his chair. "You planning to give an interview about how Officer Donovan's a racist piece of shit? Because I'm pretty sure everybody already knows that." "I'm planning to give him a story," Bumpy said quietly. "But not yet. First, I need more information." "Information about what?" "About how deep this goes. Who else is involved? Where the money goes." Bumpy pulled out a small notebook from his jacket pocket. "I need names, dates, amounts. I need evidence that can't be ignored." Tommy stared at him. "You're going after a cop with paperwork. I'm going after a whole system with proof." Bumpy tapped the notebook. "Violence is easy, Tommy. Violence is what they expect. But you know what scares powerful men more than guns? Exposure. Public shame. Having their corruption spelled out in black and white where everybody can see it. And you think some newspaper story is going to bring down a police captain? No." Bumpy smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I think a newspaper story is going to force the people above the captain to throw him to the wolves. They'll sacrifice Donovan and Morrison to save themselves. That's how corruption works. It eats its own when the light gets too bright." Tommy was quiet for a moment. "That's actually pretty smart," he admitted. "But it's going to take time. And Donovan wants his money by tomorrow." "Donovan can wait." "Can Mayme?" The question hit harder than Tommy probably meant it to. Bumpy thought about Mayme sitting at home, jumping every time she heard footsteps in the hallway, about the fear in her eyes when she begged him not to retaliate. "Set up the meeting with Charlie," he said finally, "and spread the word. I want to talk to anyone who's got a story about Donovan. Anyone who's been shaken down, threatened, hurt. Tell them I'm building something and they'll be protected." "You sure about that? Protection?" "No." Bumpy stood. "But it's the best I can offer right now." The meeting with Charlie happened 3 hours later in a basement apartment. Charlie was a thin man in his 40s with ink-stained fingers and suspicious eyes that had seen too much to believe in easy promises. "Let me get this straight," Charlie said, lighting a cigarette. "You wanted to write an expose on a corrupt cop who's connected to a corrupt captain, risking my career and possibly my life. Because why exactly?" "Because it's the truth," Bumpy said. "The truth?" Charlie laughed. "Brother, I write the truth every week. You know what happens? Nobody cares. Cops are corrupt, judges are paid off, politicians look the other way. That's just how the world works." "Then why do you keep writing?" Charlie paused, the cigarette halfway to his lips. "Because somebody has to," he said quietly. "And because every once in a while, a story hits at the right time, in the right way, and it actually changes something. Not much, not enough, but something." Bumpy leaned forward. "What if I told you I could give you names, dates, dollar amounts? What if I could give you testimony from a dozen business owners? What if I could prove that Donovan and his captain have been running a protection racket for 3 years? I'd say that's a good start." Charlie tapped ash into a tray. "But it's not enough. People know cops are dirty. They need a reason to care. What if I told you about a 16-year-old girl in Rikers?" Charlie's expression changed. "Keep talking." Bumpy told him everything he'd learned. About Alice Cooper, about the women in Ruth's salon, about Mayme and the public humiliation on 135th Street, about the systematic abuse of power that had turned Harlem into Donovan's personal hunting ground. By the time he finished, Charlie had filled half a notebook with notes. "This is big," Charlie said. "This is really big. But, Bumpy, you understand what you're asking me to do? I publish this. They'll come after me. They'll sue the paper, threaten my editor, maybe worse. I know. And they'll come after you harder. Donovan's not going to just roll over because some newspaper calls him out. I know that too." Charlie studied him for a long moment. "Why now?" he asked. "You've been operating in Harlem for years. You work with dirty cops, paid off judges, played the game. Why suddenly decide to burn it all down?" Bumpy thought about Mamie's face in the moonlight, about the bruise, about the word don't, and everything it carried. "Because some things matter more than the game," he said simply. Charlie nodded slowly and closed his notebook. "I'll need 2 weeks, maybe 3, to verify everything, to build the case airtight, so they can't wiggle out of it." He stood and offered his hand. "But I'll do it on one condition." "What's that?" "When this breaks, when all hell comes down on Harlem, you remember that words have consequences too. That exposure can be just as dangerous as bullets." They shook hands. "I'll remember," Bumpy said. Sunday morning arrived like a deadline. Bumpy sat at his kitchen table. The $200 Donovan had demanded stacked in neat bills in front of him. Mamie stood at the stove, making eggs neither of them would eat. "You're really going to pay him?" she said. It wasn't a question, but Bumpy answered anyway. "For now. And then I'm going to destroy him." He looked up at her. "But it's going to take time. Charlie needs to build the story, gather evidence, make sure it sticks. Until then, we play along. Until then, we survive." The knock on the door came at exactly noon. Mamie flinched. Bumpy stood and straightened his jacket, picking up the money. "Stay in the kitchen," he told her. "Bumpy, please." She nodded and moved to where she couldn't be seen from the doorway. Bumpy opened the door. Donovan stood there in his uniform, Sullivan hovering behind him looking uncomfortable. The cop's eyes were bright with anticipation. He probably expected Bumpy to fight back, to give him an excuse for violence. Instead, Bumpy held out the money. 200, he said evenly, "like you asked." Donovan's smile faltered for just a second. Then he snatched the bills and counted them slowly, making a show of it. "Smart man," he said. "I was hoping you'd be stupid. Would have given me a reason to finish what I started with your wife." Bumpy's hands tightened into fists at his sides, but his face remained perfectly calm. "We done. For now." Donovan pocketed the money. "But the price goes up next month. 300. And the month after that, 4. You understand how this works, right? You pay and I don't come back." "I understand exactly how it works." Something in Bumpy's tone made Donovan pause. He studied Bumpy's face, looking for fear or anger or submission. He found nothing. "You think you're clever," Donovan said quietly. "You think because you got money and connections, you're different from the rest of these animals. But you're not. You're just another racial slur who needs to be reminded of his place." "My place," Bumpy repeated softly. "That's right. And your place is down there." Donovan pointed at the floor with the rest of the trash. Sullivan shifted behind him. "Pat, we should go. Captain's waiting for his." "Captain can wait." Donovan stepped closer to Bumpy. "I want to make sure we understand each other. You pay me, you keep your head down, and maybe I don't come back to that pretty wife of yours. You got that?" Bumpy met his eyes. "I got it." "Good." Donovan stepped back. "See you next month, Bumpy. Try not to miss me too much." He laughed as he walked away. Sullivan trailing behind him, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. Bumpy closed the door and stood there for a moment, breathing slowly, carefully, keeping the rage locked down tight where it couldn't escape and ruin everything. Mayme came out of the kitchen. "You did the right thing," she said, but she didn't sound convinced. "Did I?" She didn't answer. Bumpy walked to the window and watched Donovan and Sullivan get into the patrol car and drive away. $200. Chump change for a man like Bumpy. But the cost of that money, the humiliation, the submission, the act of handing over cash to the man who brutalized his wife, was more than he'd ever paid for anything in his life. His reflection stared back at him from the window glass. "What happens next?" Mayme asked softly. Bumpy pulled out the small notebook where he'd been writing down names and dates and dollar amounts. Opened it to a fresh page. Wrote down today's date and the amount and Donovan's name. Evidence. Proof. The beginning of something that would take time, but would be permanent. "Next," he said, "I make a phone call." That evening, Bumpy met Tommy in an alley behind a closed butcher shop. "I need you to do something for me," Bumpy said. "Something that might seem strange. Everything you've asked me to do this week has seemed strange. I need you to follow Donovan. Every day, every night. I want to know where he goes, who he talks to, what he does when he's not shaking down Harlem businesses." Tommy frowned. "You looking for dirt?" "I'm looking for patterns. Habits. Weaknesses." Bumpy pulled out a fresh notebook and handed it to Tommy. "Write down everything. Times, places, people. If he meets with Morrison, I want to know when and where. If he visits the same bar every Thursday, I want to know which one. This is going to take weeks." "I know. And Charlie's story won't run for at least 2 more weeks after that." "I know that too." Tommy pocketed the notebook. "So we're playing the long game. We're playing the smart game." Bumpy looked toward the street. Violence is quick, but it doesn't last. Exposure, though. Exposure's forever. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks of Bumpy collecting information, of Tommy following Donovan to the city, of Charlie verifying every detail and building his story. 3 weeks of Mayme flinching at unexpected sounds, of neighbors whispering, of Harlem watching to see what Bumpy would do. And then, on a cold November evening, the word went out. Bumpy Johnson was making a move. Tonight, at the Cotton Club's back alley. Tommy had done his job perfectly. Whispered in the right ears, dropped hints in the right conversations, made sure the information would flow exactly where Bumpy wanted it to go, straight to Officer Patrick Donovan. By 11:45, Bumpy was standing alone in the alley behind the Cotton Club, a single streetlight casting long shadows across the wet pavement. Behind a dumpster 30 feet away, Charlie sat with his camera, hidden in the darkness. They'd gone over the plan 3 times. Charlie would stay quiet, stay hidden, and only reveal himself when Bumpy gave the signal. Everything depended on timing. Everything depended on Donovan being exactly as arrogant as Bumpy believed he was. At 11:53, he heard footsteps. 3 sets. Donovan appeared first, his uniform catching the streetlight. Sullivan was with him, and behind them was a third cop Bumpy didn't recognize. Donovan stopped 10 feet away and smiled. "Well, well," he said, "the king of Harlem, waiting for us like a good little boy. I'm touched." Bumpy didn't respond. Tommy said he wanted to talk. Donovan continued, walking closer. Said you had something for me. A peace offering, maybe? Finally figured out how things work around here. I figured out exactly how things work. Bumpy said quietly. Donovan laughed. That's what I like to hear. So what did you bring me? More cash. I didn't bring you money. The smile faltered. No, no. Donovan's hand moved to his nightstick. Sullivan tensed. The third cop took a step to the side, flanking Bumpy. Then why are we here, Bumpy? Donovan's voice had gone cold. I brought you here, Bumpy said, to give you a choice. A choice. Donovan laughed again, but there was no humor in it now. You think you're in a position to offer me choices? I think, Bumpy said slowly, that you've been running a protection racket in Harlem for 3 years. I think you collected approximately $47,000 from local businesses. I think you split that money with Captain Morrison 60/40, and you've been skimming an extra 10% off the top that Morrison doesn't know about. The alley went very quiet. Donovan's smile had vanished completely. I think, Bumpy continued, that on July 15th, you assaulted a woman named Ruth Williams and broke her arm when she couldn't pay. I think on September 2nd, you arrested a 16-year-old girl named Alice Cooper on false charges after you violated her. I think you've terrorized this neighborhood because you believe nobody would ever have the courage or the evidence to stop you. You got a lot of theories, Donovan said. His hand was on his gun now. But theories don't mean shit. You're right. Bumpy reached into his jacket pocket. All three cops drew their weapons. Easy, Bumpy said, moving slowly. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. Just a list. Names, dates, amounts. Every business you've shaken down. Every person you've hurt. Every dollar you've stolen. He dropped on the ground between them. That's impossible, Donovan said. But his voice had changed. Nobody would talk. People talk when they're tired of being afraid. When they realize there's someone willing to stand up and make it count. Bumpy gestured at the paper. Pick it up. Read it. You'll see I'm not bluffing. Donovan didn't move. Here's your choice, Bumpy said. You can shoot me right now. 3 cops, 1 criminal, self-defense. I'm sure you've used that story before. But if you do, that list goes public. Every name on it. Every crime. Every victim. You're bluffing. Am I? Bumpy's voice was cold as winter. Or are you just hoping I am because the alternative terrifies you? Sullivan spoke up, his voice shaking. Pat, maybe we should. Shut up, Donovan snapped. He was staring at Bumpy, trying to read him. Bumpy stood perfectly still, hands at his sides, unarmed and unafraid. You put your hands on my wife, he said quietly. You called her things I won't repeat. You humiliated her in front of the whole neighborhood because you thought you could, because you thought I'd do what everyone else does, swallow it, accept it, let you walk away. And instead you made a list? Donovan laughed, but it sounded hollow. That's your big move? Paperwork. No. Bumpy's eyes were hard. My big move is giving you the chance to confess. Confess to what? Everything. Bumpy took a step forward. You're going to tell the truth about what you've done, about the protection racket, the assaults, the corruption. You say it out loud right here, right now. Or what? Or the story runs anyway, and you go down without even the dignity of honesty. Donovan's face twisted with rage. You think some newspaper story is going to bring me down? You think anyone gives a shit what happens in Harlem? There it is, Bumpy said softly. That's what you really think. That's what all of you think. That we're less than human. So it doesn't matter what you do to us. I think, Donovan said, raising his gun and pointing directly at Bumpy's chest, that you made a big mistake tonight. Because now I got 3 witnesses who'll say you threatened a police officer, and I got every right to put you down like the dog you are. His finger moved the trigger. Do it, Bumpy said. Pull that trigger. But know that the second you do, everything I built, every piece of evidence, every witness statement, every dollar amount goes public. Your career ends. Your reputation ends. Your life, as you know it, ends. You're bluffing. You keep saying that. Bumpy smiled, and it was the coldest smile Donovan had ever seen. but you haven't pulled the trigger yet. The moment stretched out. Donovan's hand was shaking now. Sweat had started to bead on his forehead despite the cool October air. Here's what's going to happen, Bumpy said, his voice calm and clear. You're going to lower that gun. You're going to tell me the truth. And maybe, I'll give you a way out of this that doesn't destroy everything you've built. Why would I believe you? Because, Bumpy said, I'm the only chance you've got. Donovan stood there, gun still raised, mind racing through his options. Slowly, reluctantly, Donovan lowered his gun. That's better, Bumpy said. Now! A camera flash exploded in the darkness. Donovan spun around, momentarily blinded, raising his gun toward the source of the light. Charlie stepped out from behind the dumpster, camera in hand, already advancing the film for another shot. Evening, officers, he said pleasantly. Charlie Williams, Amsterdam News. I've been documenting this whole conversation. You son of a... Donovan lunged toward Charlie. Bumpy moved. He was across the distance in 3 steps, grabbing Donovan's gun hand and twisting it. The gun clattered to the wet pavement. Donovan swung with his free hand, but Bumpy caught it, spun him around, and slammed him face first against the brick wall. Don't. Bumpy said quietly into Donovan's ear. Don't make this worse than it already is. Sullivan and the 3rd cop had their guns out again, but they were frozen, unsure whether to shoot, unsure what would happen if they did. Charlie's camera flashed again. That's assault on a police officer, Sullivan said weakly. You can what? Charlie kept taking pictures. Arrest the man who just exposed a massive corruption ring? I'm sure that'll look great in tomorrow's paper. Bumpy released Donovan and stepped back. Donovan turned around, and there was something in his eyes now that hadn't been there before. Fear. Real, genuine fear. Here's what happens next, Bumpy said. Charlie's going to publish his story. Every detail. Every victim. Every dollar. And when he does, the people above Captain Morrison are going to need someone to blame. Someone to sacrifice to make it all go away. They will. Bumpy cut him off, because that's how corruption works. The system protects itself by feeding the lowest man to the wolves. And you, Donovan, you're the lowest man. Donovan's face had gone pale. Unless, Bumpy continued, you give me something first. What? A confession. On record. Everything you've done, everyone involved, how deep it goes. You do that, and maybe Charlie's story focuses on the system instead of just you. Maybe you become the whistleblower instead of the villain. You want me to rat out my captain? My whole precinct. Donovan laughed, but it was the laugh of a broken man. They'll kill me. They'll kill you anyway, Bumpy said. At least this way, you go down with a shred of dignity. The alley was silent except for the distant sound of jazz music drifting from the Cotton Club. Donovan looked at Sullivan, who wouldn't meet his eyes, looked at the 3rd cop, who'd already holstered his weapon and taken a step back, looked at Charlie and his camera, documenting everything, looked at Bumpy Johnson, standing there calm and controlled, holding all the cards. You planned this, Donovan said quietly. From the beginning, the money, the waiting, everything, you were building a case. I was building justice, Bumpy corrected. There's a difference. Donovan laughed, a broken, bitter sound. Then, slowly, he sank to his knees on the wet pavement. What do you want me to say? His voice was hollow. Bumpy gestured at Charlie, who pulled out his notebook. Start, Bumpy said, with my wife. Tell him what you did to Mayme Johnson on October 7th, 1938. Donovan closed his eyes and began to talk. He talked about the protection racket, about Captain Morrison and the 60-40 split, about the women he'd hurt, and the businesses he destroyed. About 3 years of systematic abuse that had turned Harlem into his personal hunting ground. Charlie wrote down every word. The camera flashed periodically, capturing Donovan on his knees, confessing, breaking. When Donovan finally finished, his voice was hoarse and his face was wet with tears. "That's everything," he whispered. "No," Bumpy said quietly. "There's one more thing. You're going to apologize." "What?" "To Mayme, to Ruth Williams, to Alice Cooper's mother, to every person you hurt." Bumpy's voice was steel. "Charlie's going to print those apologies right alongside your confession. And you're going to live with knowing that everyone sees you for exactly what you are." Bumpy grabbed Donovan by the collar and hauled him to his feet, slamming him back against the wall. For the first time that night, real violence flashed in his eyes. "You can," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "And you will, because the alternative is I forget about justice and remind you what happens to men who put their hands on my wife." He released Donovan, who slumped against the wall. "Charlie," Bumpy said, "you got everything you need?" "Every word," Charlie confirmed. "This is going to be the biggest story of the year." Sirens began to wail in the distance. "That's my cue," Charlie said, tucking away his notebook. "I'll have the story ready by Monday." "Make it good," Bumpy said. Charlie disappeared into the shadows. Bumpy looked at Donovan one last time. "You wanted to know your place," he said quietly. "Now you know. It's down there." He pointed at the ground where Donovan knelt, with the rest of the trash. Then he walked away, leaving Donovan kneeling in the alley as police cars screamed toward them. He didn't run, didn't rush, just walked with the same calm, purposeful stride he'd had since this whole thing started, disappearing into Harlem's darkness like a ghost. Behind him, the sirens arrived. Red and blue lights flooded the alley. And Officer Patrick Donovan, still on his knees in the rain-soaked filth, finally understood that he'd lost. The Amsterdam news hit the streets on Monday morning like a bomb. Charlie had outdone himself. 3 full pages. Photographs of Donovan on his knees in that alley. Confession pouring out of him like poison. Direct quotes from victims. Ruth Williams, Alice Cooper's mother, James Miller, a dozen others who'd finally found the courage to speak. And in the center of it all, the detailed accounting. $47,000, 3 years, 64 documented assaults, one 16-year-old girl in Rikers on false charges. The numbers didn't lie. By noon, every person in Harlem had read it or heard about it. By 2 in the afternoon, the story had jumped to the mainstream papers. By evening, City Hall was fielding calls from reporters across the country. And by midnight, Captain Robert Morrison had resigned. Bumpy read about it in his apartment. Mamie sitting beside him on the couch. The bruise on her face had faded to yellow-green, still visible but healing. "They're calling you a hero," she said softly, gesturing at the newspaper. Charlie quoted the neighborhood. "Mrs. Patterson said you gave Harlem its dignity back." "I didn't give them anything," Bumpy replied. "They always had it. I just helped them remember." There was a knock at the door. Tommy stood in the hallway, grinning. "You seeing this?" He waved his own copy of the Amsterdam news. "The whole city's going crazy. They arrested Donovan 2 hours ago. Perp walked him right out of the precinct in handcuffs. And Morrison's not just resigned, he's lawyering up. Word is the DA's building a case for racketeering." Bumpy nodded slowly. "What about the other cops? Sullivan and the one from the alley?" "Sullivan's cooperating. Gave up everything he knows in exchange for immunity." 3 days after the story broke, Bumpy received a visitor he wasn't expecting. Alice Cooper's mother. She was a small woman, thin from worry and grief, with eyes that had seen too much suffering. She stood in the doorway of the Rhythm Club, wringing her hands nervously. "Mr. Johnson," she said, "I don't mean to bother you, but I wanted to thank you." Bumpy gestured for her to sit. "You don't need to thank me for anything, Mrs. Cooper." "Yes, I do." She sat on the edge of the chair. "Because of your story, because of what you did, they're reviewing Alice's case. The DA says the charges were fraudulent. Says she'll be home by the end of the week." Her voice cracked on the last word. Bumpy felt something tighten in his chest. "That's good news," he said quietly. "That's real good news. She's been in there for 3 months." Mrs. Cooper wiped her eyes. 3 months of hell because that man, because he... She couldn't finish the sentence. Bumpy reached across the table and took her hand. "She's coming home," he said firmly. "That's what matters now. She's coming home, and Donovan's going to prison. And maybe that's enough." Mrs. Cooper nodded, squeezing his hand. "You gave us hope," she whispered, "when I thought there was none left. You gave us that." On Friday, exactly 1 week after the story broke, Bumpy walked down 135th Street, the same street where Donovan had struck Mayme, the same corner where she'd fallen. But something had changed. People met his eyes when he passed, nodded with respect that felt different from the fear-based deference he'd gotten before. Mrs. Patterson waved from her stoop. James Miller came out of his grocery store to shake Bumpy's hand. "You did good," Miller said simply. "Real good." A group of young men, standing on the corner, stood their ground. One of them, barely 20 years old, stepped forward. "Mr. Johnson," he said, "I just wanted to say what you did for Miss Mayme. For all of us, that took real courage." Bumpy studied the young man's face, saw the hope there, the belief that maybe things could be different. "It took time," Bumpy corrected gently, "and patience, and knowing when to fight and when to think. Remember that." When he reached the spot where Mayme had fallen, he stopped. Someone had cleaned it. The broken eggs and rotting fruit were gone. The pavement was scrubbed, and in their place, someone had left a small bouquet of flowers. Bumpy picked up the flowers and read the note attached. For Mrs. Johnson, for dignity, for justice. He carried them home. That evening, Bumpy and Mayme sat on their apartment steps, watching the sun set over Harlem. The autumn air had turned crisp, carrying the smell of someone's dinner cooking and the distant sound of jazz from clubs. Mayme leaned against his shoulder. The bruise on her face finally faded enough that strangers wouldn't stare. "You've been quiet all week," she said. "Been thinking." "About what?" Bumpy was quiet for a moment, watching two children play stickball in the street. "About what happens next," he said finally. "Morrison's gone. Donovan's facing 20 years. But the system that created them is still there. There'll be other cops, other captains, other men who think they can do whatever they want to people who look like us. So what do we do? We remember." Bumpy put his arm around her. "We remember that exposure works. That patience works. That sometimes the smartest weapon isn't a gun. It's the truth told loudly enough that people can't ignore it." Mayme turned to look at him. "You've changed. Maybe," he smiled slightly, "or maybe I just finally learned what you've been trying to teach me all along, which is that real power isn't making people fear you. It's making them believe in something better." She kissed his cheek, and they sat in comfortable silence as Harlem breathed around them. 2 weeks later, the precinct assigned a new captain to the Harlem beat. His name was Williams, a black man, which was almost unheard of in 1938. His first act was to meet with community leaders, including Bumpy. "Things are going to be different," Williams said. "I can't undo the past, but I can make damn sure it doesn't happen again." Bumpy studied him carefully. "Words are easy, Captain. Actions are what matter. Then judge me by my actions. Williams met his eyes without flinching. And if I fail, you do what you did to Donovan. You expose me. You tear down whatever corruption I allow to exist. Deal. Bumpy thought about it, then extended his hand. Deal. They shook, and Bumpy walked out of the precinct knowing that nothing was permanent. Not peace, not justice, not change. But maybe, just maybe, they bought themselves some time, some breathing room, some proof that the system could be bent, if not broken. It was more than they'd had before. On a cold November evening, Bumpy sat in the Rhythm Club's back room, doing what he'd always done, settling disputes, managing the numbers operation, keeping order in Harlem's underworld. But there was a difference now. When people came to him with problems, they didn't just talk about money or territory. They talked about cops who were hassling them, about businesses being shaken down, about injustices they previously accepted as inevitable. And Bumpy listened, not because he was a hero, not because he was trying to save Harlem, but because he'd learned that sometimes the line between criminal and protector was thinner than anyone wanted to admit, that a man could run an illegal numbers racket and still fight for justice. That moral complexity wasn't weakness, it was reality. As Bumpy walked home that night, past the spot where Mayme had fallen, past the children playing without fear, past the neighbors who nodded with genuine respect, he thought about legacy. Not the legacy of Bumpy Johnson, numbers runner and enforcer, but the legacy of a man who'd chosen the harder path when the easy one would have felt so much better, who'd chosen exposure over execution, truth over vengeance, justice over satisfaction. The city had changed that night in the alley, not because of violence, but because one man had been patient enough, smart enough, brave enough to prove that the system's armor had cracks. And those cracks would be exploited by anyone willing to take the time to find them. Mayme was waiting on the steps when he arrived home. "You're late," she said, but she was smiling. Had things to do. Always do. She stood and took his hand. "Come on, dinner's getting cold." They walked inside together, and Bumpy closed the door on a Harlem night. Outside, the neighborhood breathed and moved and survived. But now it breathed a little easier, moved a little freer, survived with a little more dignity than it had before. If this story held you here, if you felt Mayme's courage, if you felt the weight of silence breaking, then you already understand something important. Stories like this don't live unless they're shared. They don't grow unless someone chooses to stay. So don't just listen and walk away. Subscribe, not for content, but for continuation. Because this channel isn't about entertainment alone. It's about memory, about dignity, about the moments history tried to erase. And leave a comment, not a throwaway line, but your voice. Tell me what moment stayed with you. Tell me whose name you won't forget. Because every comment proves that the truth didn't end when the story did.